Welcome, my friends, to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today for a fun conversation with a passionate author. We're kicking off the program, like it's our tradition, with a short reading from the feature book. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started.
Hey, this is JP Corwin, your friendly neighborhood blind guy. I am a military fantasy horror author, singer, songwriter, composer, and random pain in poor DC Gomez's ass. You are now going to listen to a brief excerpt from the third book in my series, The Cycle of Bones. The book is called The Eaters of Time. Enjoy. Venzine, Duchy of Corwyn, County Yizhny Pochod, Barony of Heartscross, the Ash March. 5 Koruna Cycli, 22 days after the Red Storm at Westsong. Castan found frustration an unwelcome companion. Her blood was up, her senses keen for any hint of useful information about the ever-growing number of horsemen to the west. She needed to find her hunting party and what? They don't need me to tell them about the horsemen. This close to where the ash trees end, a body would have to be blind, deaf, and dead not to notice a herd that size. No, her hunting party was composed of Rakosh and her allotment of the Perkoy household guard. They surely wouldn't need her to help or guide them. The truth was that she wanted to fight. The problem was that she was dressed for a leisurely ride in what, this close to Edmund's encampment, were considered safe lands. She wasn't unarmed, of course, but she had no sword, only an exceptionally long dagger. A good enough weapon for close combat with a fool of a highwayman, but less than ideal to deal with an armed and armored soldier. And they are indeed soldiers. She hadn't had more than a glimpse of them through the trees. It would have been too great a risk to get closer. Still, she'd seen both Leather Scale and Jane Hallbergs on more than a few of the folks she'd spied. She thought she'd even seen a pair of men wearing thick wooden breastplates beneath their hide cloaks. These were called Beimortrea, literally wooden shirt in Jodenth, and were reputed to stop arrows in much the way a wooden shield did. This is Dukarn's army? What she'd seen certainly looked Jodenth, but then that was part of the deception they suspected, wasn't it? Jodenth, who'd had enough of raiding or Harn's hirelings trying to use the outlaws to his advantage, the danger, at least in the short term, was much the same. Pagoda knows his way around these trees, and Rakosh is a hunter. They'll be fine, surely. I'll likely be more use back with Edmund at Yizhny Love. Jafil's ears were suddenly flat against his head. More than that, his nostrils had begun to flare. Clearly something had made him uneasy. Castan could feel his body coiling, preparing to bolt. She tightened her grip on the reins, listening. Nothing. Not even birdsong. Then the scent struck her. Linseed oil and wax. Someone had recently unsheathed the sword. That scent was too telling to be anything else. Its relative strength sent two facts racing one another in her mind. It's fresh and it's close. Hells. She loosened her grip on the reins, slid her feet so that they sat more firmly in the stirrups, and prepared herself for Jafil to Necht to Necht, Kovalunstadter. A man's voice, low-toned and delighted, came from the trees just to the east. To Gestela Tiford. He rolled his R's less severely than the Odensbreck she'd learned, but she had no trouble understanding him. No, you don't, daughter of Corwyn. You stay quiet, my pretty. Castan froze, letting the genuine sense of fear, of anticipation, flower in her chest. She rode them like a wave, tightening her grip on Jafil's reins to hold him fast. The horse gave a little squeal, pawing at the ground in obvious anxiety, but otherwise held his ground. He's alone. No sniggering, no other foot. No, there's a second and a third, or I'm a fool. Tivanum girath, verik. Gehemver. Getivani nekta yarbrand. She didn't need to make her voice sound uncertain. She knew the Odin tongue, but rarely had much chance to practice it. Much like her knowledge of Norkish, it was easier to translate what one heard than what one wished to say. My father will be angry, war captain. Be his servant. Be my protector, not my enemy. Speak the traitor's tongue. Hearing Jodensbreck pour out of your traitor's mouth makes me sick. Traitor's mouth? She was about to offer a reply when he spoke anew. Get down from your horse. She complied, marking the other two figures from the corner of her eye. Step to me. Do it smartly before I get bored. Again he rolled his R's. She took 2 steps toward him, Jaffiel's reins in her dim hand. Stop! I didn't tell you to bring your steed. My kinsman will take care of him. If I let the reins go, he'll bolt, Varric. Again, Caston used the honorific, though she doubted anyone else this man knew would consider it fitting. She'd kept her voice small and uncertain. It was still too soon to be certain of much. She'd heard 2 more, but hadn't marked them visually yet. Growling, the man stood up at last. Caston looked him up, then down again. He had a hunter's build, lithe of limb and likely able to walk or run for long periods without tiring. She marked his dark, sun-baked skin. No hair atop his head, but a long fringe of dirty blonde started just above his ears. It hung in a scattering of small braids, as did his graying beard. He wore fetid furs and half-cured hides, with a baldric stretching from his right shoulder to his left hip. An ancient-looking sword hung awkwardly in both hands near his waist, blade pointed down beside his left boot. Adge, on the Oshvim. Adge held her horse. To her right, a youth close to Fetim's age walked toward her, glaring. These 2 are related, surely. His hair is long and full, but he has an unbroken version of the swordsman's nose. If this one's seen 16 springs, I'm the Emperor's heir. Behind the bushes from whence he'd come, she saw a girl much closer to Moxu's age, watching this tableau with wide, dark eyes. The youth, Adge apparently, stalked toward her, wearing a look of uniquely male insolence. Were he alone, he would have had far less confidence. Else, he might even have worn a nervous, hopeful smile. She kept her grip tight on the reins as he neared, lifting the hand that held them to her breast as if keeping them close to her heart. His eyes followed the hand, lingering upon it for a beat. As if waking from a daydream, he reached to snatch the reins away. Caston fought for a moment, as if too frightened to give up her horse. He yanked, meaning to take the reins with a sudden burst of strength. As her arm was pulled to near full extension, she stopped resisting. She released her grip, causing Ash to momentarily stumble and Jaffiel to squeal and paw at the ground. The youth moved to adjust his footing, but it was too late. Barely a blink, and it was over. Her dim hand free of the reins, she brought that same arm up to wrap around his throat, even as she slipped behind him. With her right hand, she drew the knife at the small of her back, pressing its point against the tender flesh below the hinge of his jaw. Taking a half step to center her balance, she forced Adge to lean back awkwardly against her left thigh. His hands came up instantly, trying to peel her forearm away from his neck. Venom! Venom! Tu venom nekt van tu, Adge. Nekt you, nekt hem brand. Your father can't protect you, Adge. Not in time, not with his sword. She then shaped her voice toward the man. Or do your children speak the trade tongue? He shook his head. She was dismayed to see he looked more angry than afraid for her prisoner's life. Coward! Thou your Alisven! You would take the life of a boy? You would revenge yourself in such a way? Thou your Alisven! He delivered this in a strangled, R-rolling roar. If I am a wicked serpent, Varric, then too Ed said thou will brandyman. Said thou will brandyman, and necht vanum. You are a false warrior, and no father. Who is it that sent him to me, risking his life, heedless of what might happen? You have made war on me and lost. Now, make the peace. Pay the price in pride, not in blood. She searched out his eyes. Lay down your sword. It should have been over, but no. With a near feral growl, he charged. He brought the sword up high over his head in both hands and simply ran at her. It was clumsy, but the look on his face was nothing short of savage. She waited for as long as she could, had an instant of indecision, then shoved the unfortunate Adge at his father. The man brought his sword down, hammering at the boy's shoulder out of unfocused rage. Blessedly, he only managed to hit him with the blunt spine. The blow caused Adge to fall at his feet, tangling them for a beat. That part was what Caston had hoped for. The swordsman struck Adge a second time, then kicked him for good measure, cursing. The sickening crack meant at least one bone hadn't survived unbroken. That hadn't been her intent. Still kicking the boy, as if turning away was an act of deepest concentration, the swordsman tore his face up toward Caston. His eyes were wide and a somehow malevolent green. She drew a quick draft of cold air, gauging his gait. A single thought flashed before her. You didn't have to die, Odenth. Without so much as a grunt, she pushed forward out of her stance, shoving the dagger up under the shelf of the man's chin even as he drove toward her. She held it there, supporting his weight as the strength went out of him. She could smell the meat in his breath. A sweet, pork-like stench mingled with the fresh blood filling his mouth. No sooner had this registered than she saw the shocked look of clarity in his sage-colored eyes grow glassy and still. She heard the unmistakable sound of first one, then two more arrows rend the air from somewhere behind the newly made corpse. My lady! Caston! Rakosh's voice, sounding pained but mightily relieved. There may be more, said she, and said no more for the moment. Her voice was calm, though there was a clipped sharpness to it that she rarely showed others. Certainly, in the short time he and Andre had been in her service, she never had call to use it. She didn't waste time looking for Rakosh in the tree line. Instead, she dropped the dead swordsman, eschewing her dagger for his sword. To her right, she saw the boy Adge on his belly with an arrow in his back. He wouldn't survive. The arrow was buried deep where the heart rested. His fingers were twitching, as were his feet. Rakosh was coming toward her. Nodding to him, she held up her hand and walked toward the unfortunate Ash's side. She called his name once, twice, no reaction. Standing, she did the merciful thing, finishing him with her newly acquired sword. Are you well? Did they... No, you don't look wounded. I was afraid for your life, lady. I know you know something of how to fight, but... Rakosh shook his head. We must hurry. While no more are here, there are unnumbered others like these, and close. She ignored this. There was a girl. There was. She was quick and small. I missed her with both arrows. Kerstin forced herself not to react. The idea of killing a child, even an enemy child who would surely report what she'd seen to the rest of her people, was abhorrent. It was pragmatic, but there were limits. Weren't there? Lady, his voice was both ragged and anxious. Where are the others? They were ambushed. I'm an archer, not a swordsman. Begota commanded me to run and warn the encampment. The woods are full of their scouts. Perhaps they were captured. Hells, let them have been captured. She moved over and pulled the baldric off of the man's corpse. As she'd thought, it held a back scabbard. She sheathed the blade, slung the baldric into position over her right shoulder, then saw to her dagger. There wasn't time to do more than wipe the bulk of the blood from both the blade and bright hand, so she contented herself with that. I fear we're doomed to walk. She'd stood, turning as she spoke, only to find Jafil still standing by, utterly nonplussed, idly cropping grass. Or Jafil can bear us, if he consents. She shook her head, mounted up, then held a hand down for Rakosh. Edmund had been wrong. Those two, at least, had been Jotunth. The rest of the army might be mercenaries dressed to look the part. She supposed it was possible, but those two had unquestionably been Jotunth. Rakosh grunted as he got into place behind her. You all right? Ready? His breath sounded a bit labored, but his response was steady and sure. I'm as ready as may be, lady. With that, she turned Jafil, making for Yizny love as swiftly as she dared.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Inside the Minds of Authors. I am excited to be here with you today. Amazing guests, as you guys already realized. And we're going to be talking not just to an author, but also to a dear friend of mine. And in case you guys did not know, he is also the creator of our amazing opening and closing music. So let's give it up to my fabulous friend, JP. Hi, sweetie. How are you?
I am fantastic, my dear. How are you?
I am so excited you're here. For everybody who does not realize, you are coming live to us from England, which I'm always going like, yes, I have crossed the ocean. It's always fun to get friends everywhere. Somehow you do know I'm going to put this in the comments. I'm like, and he's coming from England, just in case you didn't know. So yes.
Yeah, that's a thing. I got to hang out here again. It's great. I come here for half my year every year. I'm here just in time to attend BristolCon. Super excited. They asked me to come out. So I'll be doing that.
Awesome. So congratulations on the new book. We have been
Thank
talking
you.
throughout the year about it. So I'm thrilled.
You can't get rid of me.
I know. I have a friend in multiple places. So it's kind of exciting.
Amen.
Not complaining too much. But let's jump into the book. Let's jump into this reading. What have we heard? Where are we in the storyline? Give us a little bit of the background and bring us into the universe. Let's get started.
So nobody knew who I was when I started out from an author perspective, right? So the whole goal was to start with a novella. Everybody knew me as a musician. People had followed me. They'd gone to my shows, blah, blah, blah. But no one knew me from an author's perspective. So that was the novella, The Dawn of Unions. The idea was to make it self-contained and use that as a springboard to sort of test the waters and start things out. But it was also meant to be the springboard for the rest of the series. Well, flash forward a couple of years later, there was a bit of a technology issue during the height of the pandemic, the before times, the dark times, and that delayed book 3. But book 2 has come out, and that's The Drums of Unrest. I was on here to talk about that not long ago. And now we're on to book 3. We end book 2 with a couple of interesting cliffhangers. We're sitting in a scenario where we have 3 separate battles that are about to start or that are currently joining already in progress in different locations around the story, around the continent, and so on. And we begin this book just before that so we can see what was going on in those places, which we rolled up to with, oh, there's fighting. Uh-oh. And so now we get to see the prep, we get to see the actual fighting, we get to see and live and be over the shoulder and in the head of the people that have to defend these places and have to do all of the horrible things that happen in war, have to survive them, to say nothing of the magic that occurs and so on. And this is the first foray into the greater war that's been not just hinted at, but sort of shown in little tiny pieces over the course of the last two books. We know it's coming. We've seen these little hints as to how things are going to shake out. But now we're in our sort of, I don't want to use this comparison too liberally, but it's sort of the Helm's Deep scenario. Except, as much as I love Tolkien, the biggest complaint people have is that you end up with 8 pages describing a meadow and 8 paragraphs describing a major battle. That's a super exaggeration, but it's a common complaint. This entire book, or certainly 85+% of this entire book, focuses on these 3 battles. And I also get to do something I've been really excited about. Some folks that were introduced last book as sort of supporting cast are now full point of view characters. So I get to be in the head and over the shoulder of some people that I've been really excited to share with everybody. People met and they really liked based on fan reaction in book 2. Now we actually get to hang with them more substantially, including Lady Caston, which is always exciting.
And it's always so much fun to talk to you. It's always a blast to get in your mind and how you conduct your writing process. One of the things I know we talked about in previous episodes was the fact that to you it's a movie and you just figured out when to start the movie. So when you decided to pick book 3, why did you decide to pick up the movie at this point and not anywhere else?
That's a really good question because everybody treats it a little differently, don't they? Each author kind of uses a different set of lenses. For me, I wanted to not just, and look, swords have been drawn and we're fighting now. Because while that's incredibly interesting, it feels to me more like the sort of thing that you build toward in the moment. And I feel like if I had literally begun the book, the movie, as you say, with the exact second we left off from in the last book in these 3 different locations, it would have undercut and would have removed the buy-in build for what was going on and why. We saw Yzni Love, the big Edmund's Palisade, his hunting camp, is one of the major set pieces here. And we spent a lot of time there last book, but we walked away from that place something like a week ago in story in book 2, right? And we rolled back in at the end of book 2 to discover our battle already in progress, a battle we didn't know was happening. So for me, it was important to kind of roll the clock back a couple days and concentrate on the folks that were in Yzni Love, in the encampment, behind the palisade, and show a bit, only a bit, but a bit of what was going on while our other heroes were off doing the things they did in book 2. So this is 1 part companion novel and 1 part sequel, which is kind of my MO because that's sort of the same thing that ended up happening with book 2. I want to make sure we give everybody the necessary coverage. And I also want to make sure that you, the reader, have a really clear picture of what's going on and why. Otherwise, okay, a fight's happening. Vaguely remember being excited about that at the end of the book, right? It's been a year and a half, almost 2 years now. I kind of remember being excited to see what happened next. That's what you're going to get. So to roll it back a couple days and be with the people who had been left behind and watch them build toward and freak out because of and prepare for, and then ultimately fight the battle, I think is way more interesting as a writer and as a reader. I think it's way more interesting and it gives you a reason to care, to buy in. That's my take.
I love the fact that you mentioned why do we care? Because sometimes in books we forget that our readers need to care. They need to be involved in this process or else they're just turning pages and they're going to put it down. So I'm loving how you're looking at it and what exactly you're trying to bring your readers on this adventure and where you want to take them with it. So it's always really, really fun for this book when you start reading, because we're looking high fantasy for everyone. Let's be
Oh,
honest,
yeah.
we're creating worlds, there's everything else. Did you had any type of research that you did that you said, okay, I want to do A, B, and C, but I need to know about fighting or techniques? Was there any research involved for a high fantasy book?
Oh yeah, a ton. I have over the years, I mean, I used to, we've talked about this before, but for readers that haven't met me before I lost the degree of vision I lost, I spent like a decade fighting armored combat. This isn't choreographed stuff. This is sort of hammer and tongs like any other martial arts match, except it's with solid core rattan and in full armor. I did this for a decade all over the country. And so I have a really, let's say, solid grounding as to different techniques in different weapons and in different pieces of armor and so on and so forth. So I had a lot of that covered. And something I did with the first book and have continued going forward is I wanted to make sure that there was, like most high fantasy that has magic, you get some degree of a magic system, right? No one ever does a combat system. And I don't mean initiative and hit points and stuff like that. I mean describing, naming the blow, the technique, explaining it, and then later on, for simplicity's sake, simply using the term. As an example, in sword technique, there is something that we call a back cut. This is predominantly horizontal strike. There's a little bit of an angle, but it's a horizontal strike, and it runs from your offside to your onside. So if you're right-handed, you're swinging it from left to right. It's called a back cut. Right? I described that early on in the book. And then later on, we have a character named Ivar, a copy from the last book, and we look over in someone else's head and we see him, and I get to describe things like Ivar rode forward on his big-chested bay and threw a tight back cut into the belly of his nearest foe. And I don't have to describe anything else because you've heard the technique and you know the name, and now you can apply it, and it gives you a really quick, really easy picture. So that was part of it. But then there are other bits. One of the shots we use is called a Molinet, but the language that comes from isn't a language that exists within the world of the books. So I had to go back to the origin of the shot, which is sort of like a miniature mill wheel, and then ramp that up through translation through a couple different languages to get what I needed so that it worked within the confines of the book and the world linguistically and didn't feel alien and yet still gave the description. So there's all of that. Then there's the generic linguistic research because I use a lot of real world languages as well as some of my own. So there's Czech, there is Polish, there is Slovakian and Slovenian, there is Norwegian, a bit of Arabic, Urdu, I got to put in finally, and so on. And these are tied to the cultures in the world. So that's part of it. Then there are other things, looking at the way things are built, looking in real life, looking at when a certain type of machine or architectural thing was invented and seeing where that lines up with the way my world is designed. There was a good week where I was researching nothing but crossbows to make sure that I understood the particulars of how early we in real life have examples of certain types of crossbows as well as siege engines. It's important to me to get it right. I know no one cares. No one cares. Unless you personally speak Urdu, you don't care that I have Urdu in there. It doesn't matter to you. But it matters to me to get right. If I put in the work, even if you never see the detail behind it, it makes it immediately more believable and more relatable. And on a side note with the language stuff, I'm fortunate enough to have some folks who have become fans of my work that are either in or from Poland, are in or from Czech Republic, are in or from Norway, and so on. And it actually means a lot to them to see bits of their culture and their language reflected in a way that is genuine and authentic.
You brought so many different pieces into it, and also the details that you take to create these worlds. You want them to be believable. You want people to feel it. You want them to get immersed in it. And that comes with details.
Well, and you have to have a middle ground, don't you? Right? Because if it's only detail, no one cares. Nobody cares. And if it's only action, you become disconnected from the action because you don't have any of the detail that gives you the emotional connection, right? So there's always that balance. And we never really get it right, even when we get it right. But it's just different sides of a coin. You can't really have one without the other and expect it to resonate.
And as authors, we have a blast creating this universe, and everybody finds their technique. Everybody finds what makes them smile, and everybody finds what is that middle ground for them and what they actually enjoy doing. So going back to the book and going back to this adventure you have created, are you planning to have more books?
Oh yeah, this is like a 9 or 10 book series. We'll see
Okay.
how far it goes. And then there are 2 series already sort of prepped and planned for the survivors after the fact.
You are on it. You officially have looked at this world in a lot more details than many of us had thought. So, looking at it, are you still thinking of publishing once a year? Because I know we talked a little bit
Yes.
about that. Okay.
Yep, that is still the plan. Last year, so it's part of the blindness card, right? I was fortunate, but I ended up with almost 2 months of no computer. My computer died in transit, and it requires some significant software to use my computer effectively. Some of it is magnification, some of it is speech to text. Your screen is being read to you by pick a computer voice. I use both of those things liberally to maneuver through the computer. So without them, I'm not really in a position where I can just get up and go. So it's not like I can just run to the local library and use their computer every day until mine gets sorted. It took me almost 2 months. And by the time that happened, it's not that I didn't know what was next in the book. I don't have that kind of writer's block, but that's a whole different thing for me than I guess for a lot of other people. But for me, it was a matter of sort of missing the groove. I'd lost the smooth road because I had lost so much time, right? It ended up between the final prep work for the trip overseas, as well as the trip itself, and then the down computer, a little over 2 months where I was unable to do much of anything. And that slowed everything down. By the time I got everything up and running, thanks to my buddy Ed Abbott and my other buddy Monty, we got everything sorted. I got the new computer and everything installed and ready to go, but it slowed the whole process down. So this book didn't wind up getting released until the very beginning of September. Hell, almost the middle of September. Long story short, yes, the plan is, now that everything is back up and running, to continue moving at the pace of 1 book a year. I skipped kind of a year when all was said and done. So 3 books in what amounts to 4 years, just under 4 years. But the books are doorstops. They're big, aside from the novella. I have no reason to believe there's going to be any more trouble, barring, technology not dying again. I've already got a lot of work done on book 4. My expectation is an August-ish, September-ish release for book 4.
I love it. I'm glad that you have a really precise schedule, because sometimes my schedules are all over the place. So I
That's
love
because
your
you're a
commitment.
crazy person. You do everything all the time with everyone. You're awesome.
I'm a little ADD sometimes. So every once in a while, something gets, out of whack and I have to bring it back. So it's always very, very exciting. I love the journey. I love the fact that you're definitely involved in your series and you're always looking how to bring your readers on. When
yeah.
you were creating these characters, did you have a message you wanted your readers to get? Something that you like, I wish you would get this.
So yes and no. I don't sit down and deliberately, sort of painstakingly plot everything out. That's not my process. I need to understand what the thrust of the book is and what my expectation is for its ending, like the big sweeping point ending, right? But beyond that, I know my characters and I know my world. So for me, it's getting into the head of the character, knowing where the overall story is going to take us, and letting the character do what he or she is going to do. I don't therefore sit down and say, I shall make a black guy. And I want people to know what I know about being a black guy, which is nonsense, right? Because for one thing, I'm not a black guy. And for another thing, it's a bit on the nose and it's a bit self-important to kind of walk in making that plan. Now, I think there's a huge difference between that and happening to write a character who, oh my God, happens to be black, and discovering things through his or her eyes. And of course, doing the research with people who have lived that life, which is something I've also done. But if you're firing on all cylinders, you're sort of vibing with the character and you're rolling forward through the story, through that character's eyes, I think you will learn the things that character has to say and that you can say through that voice. And so there's a lot of that. We have a major character who we've met, but not really in book 2, who becomes the point of view character in this book, and for very good reason, who's autistic. We have some characters indeed who are black. We have some characters who are gay, and we have some characters who are dealing with the pressures, whether they belong to those pressures or not, whether they're self-contained or self-created or not, who are dealing with the pressures of leadership, of rulership, of expectation. All of these things happen. One of the things I got to discuss and explore in this book is women who fight. Now, I discovered something, and I feel like someone should have told me. Maybe it's a blind thing. I don't know. But DC, I never knew until after I'd already written the book. Apparently, when a woman grows her breasts, she gives up the right to competence. I had no idea. No one told me.
What?
Yeah, no one told me. Like, you would have thought somebody would have said, by the way, just so you know, once they get boobs, they can't actually be effective anymore. They need a man. No one told me. I had no idea.
I'm glad nobody told you, because nobody told the rest of us with breasts. So that's probably a thing that should be spread around, I don't know, to women, because the rest of us are going, what in God's name? But it goes back to stereotypes. It goes back to those creations. And it goes back to people making these strange assumptions that I'm like, hey, that is okay. I'm like, why do we give women? Yeah, I'm with you. I'm like, what? Where did that come from?
Yeah, exactly. I've mentioned Lady Caston, who we met last book. Now she's a point of view character. And we get to, through her deliberately, through her eyes, through her head, and through the way she interacts with other people, and through the way other people interact with her, we don't get to hear that she's a badass. Well, I mean, we do, but that's not the point. We get to witness it, right? We're not talking about her being all right. She's pretty good for a girl. We don't have any of that nonsense. She is not the Supergirl who can do absolutely everything and will always win and kicks everyone's ass. It's not like that. But she has been trained and is legitimately competent and does not give up her femininity. And the reason I mentioned the whole boobs equals competence nonsense idiotic thing is because, as someone who fought for so many years, I often ran into women who fought, who wanted to fight. And some of them have attained and achieved real, absolute badassery, utter greatness, and received the accolades to prove it. Not just winning the fights, but winning laurels of their own, winning knighthoods and so on. There was, and to some degree still is, although it's gotten much better, this lunacy, this mentality that you are a woman and you're trying to play in a man's game. And if I let you, right, if as a guy, I acknowledge and let you succeed, then it will be because you have given up your femininity to do it, right? You're a fighter, you're a warrior, you're a combatant, you're a soldier, not a woman, which is absolute nonsense. It is a way it can work, right? There are people that have done that exact thing. Of course there are, but it's the exception. It's not the rule. So the gatekeeping has lessened, I think, to a large degree, but it does still exist. And the idea that you must give up your femininity to be seen as a competent combatant or competent business person in real life, it's silly, but it's also real. I can say it's silly all day long. That doesn't negate the reality of it. So I didn't walk into writing Caston under the auspices of, aha, now I can tell the world what I really think. That's not what happened. But as I kind of got into her head and began to write her, began to explore her side of the tale, this all came out in just waterfalls of proof and of scenes that both display and explore all of these things. That's just a simple, short example. But when I say short, you know me, I'm really short. But you get the idea. These are things that happen because you know your characters in your world. The more you write it and the more you explore it and the more you live in it during the times you get to play in that playground, the more these characters will sort of naturally progress in a direction that lets you explore things that you otherwise might not have, or sometimes even that you've thought many times, but rarely had the opportunity to express or even confirm.
From this perspective, I love the fact that you are very aware that sometimes a lot of our characters can become very stereotyped. And that's something you take it very, very seriously. And
Oh,
also
yeah.
the fact that you're addressing issues about just current society issues that sometimes we take for granted, good, bad, or indifferent, depending on the part of the country or the world that you're at. Women are seen very differently. We cannot take that for granted. We cannot assume that, as you said, is silly. It should not be happening. It
Right.
still happens in different parts of the world where women are second nature. They don't even have a right to have a voice. So this is very, very real. So when you're looking at high magic, somehow our high fantasy worlds always go back to a pre-colonial state and women are always second class. You're going, why does your high fantasy have to be that world? Why can't they be in charge?
See, and that's something that I was really cognizant of, really aware of as I built out this world to begin with, all the way back to before I wrote Dawn, in that, yes, these things do exist in the world. There are still stereotypes. There are still sort of class wars. War is a strong term, but say class distinctions and all of the baggage that comes with that. Racial distinctions, national distinctions, gender distinctions, sexuality distinctions. Yes, they exist in the world that I write within, right? Of course they do. Because otherwise, how bland and boring would that be? And yes, there are people who think fairly myopically and fairly sort of even colonially to a large extent, think ill of those who are different because it's human nature, unfortunately, to other people. Because at least you're not them, whoever them are. I wanted that because it's real, but I didn't want it to be a literal one-for-one copy of here and what we have seen even in the last couple of years, let alone the last 100 years. So it allowed me to go in and see, how did we get to where we are in the world within the individual societies and cultures of the world, because there are a lot of them. Where are their sort of social colloquial mindsets on race, on gender, on age, on class, on other nationalities, on magic, on swords, on religion? All of these things matter in the real world. So they need to matter in the world of my books on Skulf. And that doesn't mean they are the reason things are happening, right? That doesn't mean they are the plot of the book. Castan's sexuality, Castan's prowess, Castan's being a woman, these are not the point of the book. But of course, they're relevant to her. So they're going to be part of the lens that I get to look through when I'm writing in her head and I'm writing from her perspective, as well as those who interact with her.
I love it. And for our listeners, I'm pretty sure you guys are understanding that we can talk forever because, hey, we're really good friends. So this
Yeah.
is nothing new that we can go down these rabbit holes. But it's also to give you an understanding and a perception that sometimes you have authors who are going to push the envelope and give you something in a much more discreet sort of way. So JP does an amazing job at introducing these concepts without taking away from the story, which I think is beautiful. You know, it is part of the story. It is not the story. So I love how you said. So darling, tell us before you leave and we jump into a lightning round, where can our listeners find you, where they can get more about these books?
So finding me is easy. Just go to your favorite Google foo and type in JP Corwyn, Corwyn. You can get me at jpcorwyn.net, Facebook/JP Corwyn official, everything else just /JP Corwyn. You can find the soundtracks to the book up on Spotify or any other music thing you like, Pandora, etc., etc. The books are available online. You can get them also at most of your bookstores. You'll have to order them, I would imagine, because I'm not world famous at this point. The whole world doesn't clamor for my books yet. So that's the deal. You can find me kind of everywhere: YouTube, Twitch, etc., etc.
Awesome. So darling, let's jump into your lightning round. Let's see how you do. And I didn't even bother looking at the old ones. I just picked random. So if they sound the same, don't panic. It's just me.
Yeah.
So let's see this. Cold drinks or hot?
Hot.
Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
My kind of guy. City or country?
Ooh, that's really tough. I'm going to go with country.
Really? I would have thought city, but okay.
We'll talk about that.
Fair enough. Summer or winter?
Ooh, still tough. I'm going to go with winter.
So here's a different one. Let's see how you do with this.
Uh-oh.
If you could have coffee with any famous author, who will you pick? Dead or alive?
Dead or alive?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, God, that's really tough.
I was trying to give you options, so yes.
I'm going to go with Hawthorne.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
There's a richness to the language, but beyond that, there's a lot of just imagery that he conjures that I don't see even now anyone really doing. There's this sort of weird, almost ethereal, almost dreamlike quality to a lot of his work. So I kind of want to sit, drink coffee, and pick his brain.
I like. Sweetie, do you have any closing remarks for us?
No, I love that we get to talk. I wish we got to talk more. And I can't wait to hear what's going on next with Constantine.
That child is out of control, but yes.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Sweetie, it has been a pleasure for you to join us. Thank you so much. To our listeners, go ahead, pick up JP's series, whether you pick up book 3, whether you pick up the novella, pick one up, have a blast. Check out the music. It's going to blow you away. And remember, we're going to come back with more authors and we're going to continue to bring you some incredible things that you're probably not prepared for. So stay tuned. Have an amazing time. Bye, guys.